As the boulder settled into place, sealing the cave shut, Yuan took a moment to survey his surroundings. Though the cave appeared as if it were an abyss where no light could reach, a faint, eerie glow subtly illuminated the space. However, its source remained a mystery. The cave was surprisingly spacious, even larger than the room he had back in the bamboo garden. However, its conditions were harsh and unwelcoming. There was no proper floor, only the cold, uneven ground beneath him, layered with dirt and dust. Aside from the 2 pots placed at the far end of the space, the cave was utterly barren, not even the bare comfort of a bed to rest on. Yuan approached the pots and lifted their lids, revealing the pills inside. A single glance was enough for him to recognize their purpose. One pot contained hunger-suppressing pills, designed to stave off starvation without the need for actual food. The other held pills that would eliminate his body's need for waste elimination. It was clear that these were meant to sustain him just enough to survive, but nothing more. The spiritual energy inside the cave was also pathetically low, almost non-existent. Even if Yuan were to spend a decade cultivating there, his cultivation wouldn't see any noticeable improvements. I have to spend 2 years in this place, huh? Well, it won't be my first time, Yuan sighed with a bittersweet smile on his face. In the past, Tianyong would often find himself in confinement for breaking sect rules, mostly from fighting with other disciples. Of course, he would only spend a few days, weeks at most at a time in confinement, but when added up, it easily exceeded 2 years. During confinement, Tianyong would try to improve his martial techniques since it was a waste of time to cultivate. Now then, if my memories serve me correctly, I should be able to find that thing here. Yuan's gaze turned to look at a specific spot on the ground. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees and began digging with his bare hands, scooping away the cold, hard dirt. After digging about a meter deep, Yuan's fingers brushed against something hard and unnaturally cold. Its surface was smooth, too refined to be just another random rock buried in the dirt. He carefully unearthed the object, dusting away the loose soil until it was fully revealed. The moment his eyes confirmed it was exactly what he had been searching for, a quiet chuckle escaped his lips. A glimmer of amusement, even disbelief, flickered in his gaze as he held the object in his hands. I can't believe it's actually here. Even more unbelievable, I was put into the confinement chamber hiding this treasure. Although Yuan had never intended to visit the confinement chamber this soon, he had always planned to come here eventually. This place held something that had been on his mind since he arrived at the Immortal Monastery. Even if it wasn't guaranteed the treasure would exist, he still wanted to confirm it. Yuan spent the next few moments staring at the object in his grasp. It was small and perfectly round, its surface smooth and cool to the touch, almost identical to a monster core. Despite its unassuming size, small enough to be held between just 2 fingers, there was an undeniable weight to it, not in mass but in significance. In the past, when Tianyong first found this treasure by pure coincidence and accident, he didn't know what it was or how to use it. However, he knew it was definitely a treasure, so he kept it with him for many years until he accidentally activated the treasure. However, even after activating the treasure, Tianyong did not realize its significance or how it'd benefit him for many more years. I can't believe I am actually holding you in my grasp again, Heaven Refining Crystal. Sure enough, this unassuming treasure eventually gave birth to the legendary Heaven Refining Physique. A one-of-a-kind physique so heaven-defying that it would transcend lifetimes, following Tianyong through his future reincarnations and the reason for his immense growth. Although Tianyong never uncovered the origins of the Heaven Refining Crystal, how it came into existence or why it had been buried within the Immortal Monastery's confinement chamber, none of that truly mattered to him. Once he finished admiring the Heaven Refining Crystal, Yuan brought his thumb to his mouth and bit down until blood welled up. Holding the crystal carefully, he let the crimson droplets fall onto its smooth surface. The moment his blood made contact, it didn't smear or roll off. Instead, it was absorbed instantly, as if the crystal were alive and thirsting for his essence. A faint glow began to emanate from within, signaling the start of something profound. Yuan continued to feed his blood to the Heaven Refining Crystal, watching as it eagerly absorbed every drop. The process seemed endless, and before he knew it, dizziness crept over him, his body growing weak from blood loss. Recognizing his limit, he finally stopped and reached for a hunger pill, placing it on his tongue. As it dissolved, a wave of warmth spread through his body. The pill not only satiated hunger, it also had healing properties that would heal minor injuries, such as paper cuts, and speed up recovery. With a tired exhale, he laid down on the cold. The crystal remained clutched in his hand, its surface now faintly pulsing with life. Though the cave was bleak and desolate, Yuan closed his eyes and quickly fell asleep. Once he woke up several hours later, Yuan immediately started feeding his blood to the heaven refining crystal again, and he would repeat this process for almost an entire year. Meanwhile, the tournament ended 2 weeks after Yuan's match. As for the results, Ji-Ran had managed to win up to the 10th round before losing in the 11th round to someone at the peak of Spirit Warrior. Even with his experience and the peerless immortal technique, he was unable to bridge the gap of almost an entire realm. In the end, none of the bamboo disciples managed to win the tournament, with Ji-Ran lasting the longest and earning the most contribution. Once the tournament concluded, Ji-Ran wasted no time rushing back to find Shi Meili and the others to notify them of the situation. What? Shi Meili's voice rang out in sheer disbelief as she processed the news. Lan Yingying, on the other hand, was so stunned that words completely failed her. She simply stood there, wide-eyed, unable to form a response. Meanwhile, Tan Songyan furrowed her brows, her expression more puzzled than shocked. Unlike the others, she wasn't just overwhelmed, she was trying to make sense of the situation. He deliberately killed a disciple and even admitted to it. Why would he do such a thing? Tan Songyan wondered out loud. I don't know, and we won't be able to find out until he leaves confinement in 2 years, Ji-Ran sighed. You mean we won't be able to contact him for 2 whole years? Lan Yingying finally spoke, her voice trembling from worry. Ji-Ran shook his head. Unfortunately, we won't. Once someone enters confinement, nobody is allowed to contact them besides the sect leader. We can't sneak him out even if we want to, since the boulder that seals the place is protected with formations. I don't know why Yuan killed that disciple, but I'm sure he had a good reason for doing so, Shi Meili sighed, showing her unconditional trust in him. I also trust he wouldn't kill someone randomly, but even if he had a good reason, the sect wouldn't care about it. Regardless of his reason, he killed a disciple, and in the presence of the sect leader, no less. The disciples also seemed like they wanted to rip his throat out, Ji-Ran said. Will he be able to cultivate while in confinement? Lan Yingying then asked. No, the confinement chambers also prevent the prisoners from cultivating by depriving them of spiritual energy. The young master will have to spend the next 2 years doing mental cultivation or training his martial techniques. So we'll have to make sure we're powerful enough to protect him when he emerges in 2 years. Shi Meili wondered out loud. I don't think we'll be able to catch up with the young master's progress even with 2 years, but we can try, Ji-Ran said. Meanwhile, in the sect leader's office, an old man stood trembling before the sect leader. His eyes were bloodshot, tears still streaming down his weathered face, yet his sorrow was eclipsed by the sheer fury burning within him. His expression was a storm of anguish and rage, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. This old man was Elder Bai Zan's grandfather. Although he had been outside the sect for business, he rushed back to the sect after learning about his beloved grandson's death. Sect leader, please let me avenge my grandson, who did nothing wrong and was unjustly murdered by some psycho. Elder Bai roared, his voice filled with anguish and anger. He had also heard about the sect leader showing favoritism to Yuan by giving him a lenient punishment, which is why he didn't go straight to the confinement chamber to find Yuan. As much as he was enraged about his grandson's death, it did not cloud his judgment. I am willing to step down from my position as the Grand Elder as long as I can avenge my grandson. The position of Grand Elder stood at the pinnacle of the sect's hierarchy, second only to the sect leader. After listening to Elder Bai's impassioned plea, the sect leader finally spoke, his voice calm yet weighted with authority. I won't say you are forbidden from seeking vengeance for your grandson, he said, his gaze steady. But as the Grand Elder, you must carry yourself with grace and dignity, even in the face of vengeance. Do not let your grief cloud your judgment, nor let your wrath taint the honor you have upheld for so long. His words were not a denial, nor an approval, but a warning, a reminder that even vengeance had its own path to follow. Elder Bai's eyes gleamed with newfound determination as he realized the sect leader hadn't explicitly forbidden him from pursuing Yuan. However, despite his burning desire for revenge, he knew that as a Grand Elder, Personally executing a disciple, especially in a fit of rage, would bring severe consequences. Losing face before the sect's disciples was of little concern to him, but his reputation outside the sect was another matter entirely. His standing in the wider cultivation world was not just his own, it was tied to the immortal monastery itself. A reckless act of vengeance could tarnish not only his name but also the sect's prestige, drawing unwanted scrutiny from outsiders. Clenching his fists, Elder Bai understood that he needed to tread carefully. If he wanted justice, or vengeance, he would have to be smart about it. Elder Bai left shortly after to begin planning his revenge. At the same time, Elder Jing and Elder Sun were having a conversation on a similar subject. So, what are you going to do? Will you try to protect that disciple from Elder Bai? Elder Jing asked Elder Sun. Elder Sun let out a dry chuckle before shaking her head. Who are you talking to? Me. I'm just an ordinary sect elder who can't even follow the rules, she said, her voice laced with self-mockery. Elder Bai, on the other hand, is the Grand Elder, the second most powerful figure in the entire sect. If he decided to kill me just to get to Shaoyang, he wouldn't even blink. Protecting that boy, that would be nothing short of suicide. Despite her words, there was something unreadable in her expression, as if she wasn't entirely convinced by her own words. Elder Jing raised an eyebrow and said, while you may be an ordinary sect elder on the surface, your real background is something else entirely. With a single command, you could have even the sect leader bow to you, much less a mere grand elder. Elder Sun's expression darkened the moment her background was brought up. A sharp frown creased her beautiful face as she snapped, her voice laced with anger, you know I don't like my background being mentioned. I will die before I ask them for help. Sorry, Elder Jing quickly apologized after realizing her mistake. Once Elder Jing left, Elder Sun sighed, why did he kill Bai Zhan? He didn't seem like a vicious person. Maybe he has a good reason. Elder Sun would spend the next several days contemplating Yuan's situation. Time passed, and the bamboo disciples continued to progress their cultivation. Shi Meili and the others began training harder than usual to improve their prowess as fast as possible to surpass Yuan so they could protect him when he inevitably emerged from his confinement. When they were not grinding points at the hunting grounds, Shi Meili focused on her cultivation while Lan Yingying practiced her sword techniques with Tan Songyan. Ji Ran focused on improving his cultivation and farming points alone as usual. The true disciples eventually stopped talking about Yuan and Bai Zhan's death after many months, but that didn't mean they'd forgotten about it or stopped caring. They were simply biding their time until Yuan returned. That said, only the outer court and some inner court disciples who knew and were close to Bai Zhan cared about the situation. The core disciples couldn't care less about some drama in the outer court and focused on improving themselves. Meanwhile, Yuan would do nothing but feed the heaven-refining crystal his blood until he grew tired and had to sleep. However, as Yuan slept, his mind was consumed by incredibly vivid dreams, memories so detailed and lifelike that they felt more like relived experiences than mere illusions. These were not ordinary dreams but fragments of Tian Yang's past resurfacing. These memories were mostly of Tian Yang's days as a disciple inside the immortal monastery, but after a few months, memories of his time at Han Zexian's tomb resurfaced, mainly memories of his time inside the mountain containing Han Zexian's legacy. After dashing into the mountain to escape from the immortal clans and the 7 divine sword peaks, sect leader, Tian Yang found himself on an impossibly long, narrow path. The corridor stretched far beyond what the mountain's exterior should have allowed, defying logic and space itself. Each step echoed unnaturally, the walls pressing in with an eerie stillness, as if the very mountain was watching him. However, as freaked out as he was, Tian Yang could only move forward, as the only entrance and exit had closed behind him. After walking for days without rest, Tian Yang finally reached the end of the path. There, beyond the oppressive darkness, lay a small cavern bathed in an unearthly light. Unlike the narrow passage behind him, this space was open and strangely serene, its illumination seemingly without a clear source. The air here felt different, ancient and mythical, as if infused with the lingering presence of something beyond mortal comprehension. Despite its modest size, the cavern exuded a quiet majesty, as though it held secrets untouched by time. At the center of the cavern, a small waterfall cascaded down smooth stone, its gentle flow creating a serene ambiance. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, but Tianyong quickly noticed the water was saturated with dense spiritual energy, far richer than anything he had encountered before. Even more astonishing was what lay at the base of the waterfall, a small yet vibrant garden flourishing in its midst. Several exotic plants thrived there, their leaves shimmering with an otherworldly radiance. Though Tianyong didn't recognize them, their overwhelming aura and the sheer intensity of their spiritual energy left no doubt in his mind. These were priceless treasures, each one likely more valuable than the immortal monastery's entire collections of rare herbs. A place like this, it wasn't natural. It was a sanctuary, hidden away from the world for whatever reason. Why did Han Zexian create a place like this? And why did he want me to come here? Tianyong mumbled to himself as he continued surveying the place. At one end of the cavern, Tianyang's gaze fell upon a peculiar sight. A square-shaped platform, resembling a bed, but made entirely of an unknown stone-like material. Unlike ordinary stone, however, this one seemed to be alive with energy, drawing in the densest spiritual essence from the surrounding cavern. The sheer amount of accumulated energy was so immense that a thick mist hovered above the platform, swirling like a living entity. It was clear this wasn't a mere resting place, but a cultivation platform of unparalleled quality. The stone itself was likely a rare, priceless material that refined and amplified the spiritual energy of anyone who meditated upon it. A treasure like this was beyond value and would start wars with experts battling for its ownership. Then, Tianyang's eyes were drawn to the cavern walls, where meticulously engraved texts covered nearly every surface. Each word was carved with precision, the deep, sharp strokes indicating they had been etched by a sword or dagger rather than a mere chisel or hand. The inscriptions carried an air of intent, each stroke imbued with meaning, as if the one who had written them had poured their very soul into the engravings. Though Tianyong couldn't immediately decipher them, he could sense their significance. They weren't just ordinary writings, they held knowledge, perhaps even secrets left behind by the creator of this place. As he stepped closer, he felt a faint resonance from the words, as though they contained lingering traces of the writer's will. Were they cultivation insights, sword techniques, or perhaps the final words of someone who had sought refuge in this mysterious place? With a deep breath, Tianyong reached out, his fingers brushing against the ancient engravings. The moment his skin made contact, a sudden, bone-chilling sensation surged through his entire being. It wasn't just cold, it was an unnatural, penetrating force that seemed to freeze his very soul. His instincts flared in alarm, and without hesitation, he yanked his hand back. Just what in heaven's name is this place? And what the fuck am I doing here? Tianyong swallowed nervously as he stared at his trembling hands. Once he calmed down, Tianyong continued exploring the cavern, his heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. As Tianyong continued exploring the cavern, his attention was drawn to a wooden shelf nestled against one of the cavern walls. Despite the passage of time, the wood remained intact, exuding a faint aura that suggested it had been reinforced with spiritual energy. Resting atop the shelf were numerous spatial rings, and when Tianyong peeked inside one of them, he was surprised to find it completely filled with pills. However, Tianyong didn't know what kind of pills they were since his knowledge of pills was very limited. He checked the other spatial rings after placing down the first spatial ring. Once again, it was filled with pills, but they looked and smelled different from the previous pills. Are all of these spatial rings filled with pills? Tianyong muttered to himself as he continued finding more pills with each new spatial ring he checked. Sure enough, after checking every single spatial ring, Tianyong found nothing but pills. After putting the last spatial ring down, Tianyong returned to the center of the room and sat down on the ground. A waterfall, priceless herbs, spatial rings with countless pills, a cultivation platform, and unknown words on the walls. What the hell was Han Zexian doing in this place? And what am I supposed to do here? Can I even leave this place? Tianyong was filled with questions but nobody to answer them. Eventually, he started experimenting and studying the place in more detail. First, Tianyong decided to test the waterfall's water. Cupping his hands, he took a small sip. The moment the cool liquid passed his lips, a wave of vitality surged through his body. His fatigue melted away instantly, his energy rapidly recovering as if he had undergone days of deep meditation in mere seconds. However, the water's effects didn't stop there. A clarity unlike anything he had experienced before washed over him. His mind felt sharper, and his thoughts more refined. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing him to perceive everything with greater focus and understanding. Tian Yang's eyes widened. This wasn't just ordinary spiritual water, it was a sacred elixir, capable of restoring not only the body but also sharpening the mind. The significance of such a resource was immeasurable. Even in the most powerful sects, water of this caliber would be considered an irreplaceable treasure. Next were the herbs. Although they looked delicious, Tian Yang didn't actually dare to consume them. Unlike the waterfall, which seemed to flow endlessly, the herbs were limited, and he was worried they might not regrow once consumed. The most he could do was inspect them, but since he was not an expert in this field, he quickly gave up and moved to the cultivation bed. The moment Tian Yang sat on the cultivation bed and took a deep breath, he could feel his cultivation improving by leaps and bounds, and he hadn't even started cultivating yet. With the cultivation bed, he could progress his cultivation with ease and maybe even catch up to the experts from the immortal clans, regardless of his talents. As days turned to weeks, Tian Yang found himself intoxicated by the experience. The rapid ascension of his cultivation, the intoxicating surge of power, it was unlike anything he had ever known. His body and mind craved more, urging him to stay, to immerse himself deeper into this endless growth. And so, he remained seated for months, unmoving, consumed entirely by the boundless potential of the cultivation bed. Eventually, Tian Yang emerged from his cultivation, and his peak Spirit King had soared past Spirit Emperor and Spirit Sovereign, entering Spirit Enlightenment and stopping at the peak of Spirit Enlightenment by the end. To increase his cultivation by 3 entire realms within just a few months was unheard of and unprecedented. Moreover, Tian Yang noticed that his cultivation was no longer suppressed to Spirit King despite still being inside Han Zexian's tomb. I am actually still inside Han Zexian's tomb, right? I am not actually dead and in Cultivator's Paradise, right? Tian Yang wondered out loud. He wouldn't be surprised if the mountain actually existed in a different space and away from Han Zexian's tomb, which would explain how he could walk for days without encountering an end. After emerging from his cultivation, Tian Yang took another sip of the waterfall before turning his focus to the words on the wall. However, he quickly gave up and went to check on the pills inside the spatial rings again. Since there was no way for him to know their effects without taking them outside to get examined, Tian Yang had to consume them and examine their effects using his own body. How long have these pills been here? Pills shouldn't expire, right? It was a common rumor that pills never expired, their potency lasting for eternity. However, this was far from the truth. In reality, pills that aren't properly sealed or stored will gradually lose their effectiveness over time. The spiritual energy infused within them would slowly dissipate, weakening their medicinal properties until they eventually became nothing more than ordinary, powerless pills. If left unchecked for too long, some pills would deteriorate to the point where they crumbled like brittle crackers at the slightest touch. After embracing himself for the worst, Tian Yang picked a random spatial ring and retrieved a pill from it before consuming the pill. After consuming the pill, Tian Yang sat in silence, focusing intently on any changes occurring within his body, his back soaked in cold sweat. However, as the minutes stretched on, his anticipation slowly turned to confusion. Nothing happened. His body felt the same. His energy remained unchanged. The pill had dissolved, yet there was no reaction, not even the faintest ripple of medicinal effect. Tian Yang frowned. Had the pill lost its potency over time? Or did the pill have an effect that couldn't be felt? Since he had no way of knowing, Tian Yang could only pick up a different spatial ring and consume a different pill. The hell? Nothing's happening. Tian Yang exclaimed in disappointment when the second, third, and even fourth spatial rings contained pills